Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon. Madam Speaker, my first, notwithstanding the House Rules motion, is to bring back Bill 437-31, Bill 468, and Bill 470 to address an additional amendment or technical amendment, whatever the case may be.
On the motion without any objection, so ordered.
And then, Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the House Rules, I move that we revert back to the second reading, or revert back to motions.
On that motion without any objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the first order of business, I move that we resolve in the Committee of the Whole for the purposes of entertaining Bill 437-31, that one amendment that we talked about on Friday on a law that you sponsored to allow UOG and GCC to move forward with its projects. I move that we resolve in the Committee of the Whole and take a brief recess to invite the university and GCC officials for some questioning if senators may have the question. And I move that you, as acting chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, chair the Committee of the Whole.
On that motion without any objection, so ordered. There was an objection? Oh, no objection. Okay. The legislature then will briefly recess then to invite the visitors into the hall. The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before we recessed on Friday, I advised the body that we were approached by the University of Guam president relative to a bill that both he, along with the GCC president, Dr. Mary Okada, as well as officials from the University of Guam and the Guam Community College, USDA, the foundations of both GCC and UOG, on an idea, Madam Speaker, that I'm very happy to present on their behalf, on an idea that builds upon a public law that you authored, Public Law 30-201, which kind of finds a creative way of getting around the fact that when the debt ceiling was raised to 100%, it halted everything that UOG and GCC wanted to do with respect to the construction of the Student Service Center and the annex building for the School of Engineering, and for the refinancing of the Jesus and Eugenia Ueña Leon Guerrero School of Business and Public Administration building, and for the extension of the Guam Community College GCC Gregorio G. Perez Crime Lab building, and for the renovation and hardening of GCC buildings 100 and 200. And the idea that they asked this legislature to support, Madam Speaker, is to allow the foundations to apply for these loans, so that way they won't have to be subject to the debt ceiling requirement. This has met the approval of the Guam Economic Development Authority as well as the Bond Council, and so I've offered this as an amendment and suggest that we could put this in Bill 437, since Bill 437 deals with public school facilities. And so this is where we're at, and I thank you for the opportunity to present this in the committee of the whole, for the panel to go over this section by section to make sure that this is something that's absolutely doable. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So you're putting that in a motion then to place, to accept then this amendment
Yes, ma'am, as a new section.
as a new section. So, but before we do that then, I'd just like to go ahead and give the opportunity to the president of the university to introduce his staff and also the representative from the community college. So, Dr. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my right is Dave O'Brien, Vice President of Administration and Finance, and Mark Mendiola, the Executive Director of the UOG Endowment Foundation. On my far left, one of them is the SGA President, and the other one is the other is the Student Regent. And so the question always is which one, and I think they deliberately tried to confuse me, but these are Messrs. Jesse and Anthony Kenga, and we're very appreciative of their continuing support. And I'll let Carmen introduce herself, because it's a separate institution.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm here representing Mary Okada. I'm Carmen Santos, the Vice President of Finance and Administration.
So can I ask the twins to introduce themselves? Then we can separate you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My name is Jesse Kenga, and I'm the president for the student government. Thank you.
So that would make me Anthony Kenga and the student regent for the University of Guam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So on the motion then to accept this amendment, is there anybody who would like to speak on it or ask any questions? Okay, so I have the Vice Speaker and then Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I see on page 4 that for the university, there's a proposal to borrow about 35 or 36 or maybe 37 million. Refinance the 12.5, borrow 18, that'd be 30.5. Borrow an additional 3.6 for the engineering building, comes to 30.34, and then funding appropriate debt service, all right, 34.35. My one question is, can anyone, and this is supposed to go through the Endowment Foundation, can someone provide us with the current financial condition of the foundation and whether or not they can support a loan of $35 million?
Thank you, Senator. The foundation does not have the financial capacity to repay that loan. What they, in my conversations with USDA, what they are looking for is the strength of the funding source that would stand behind it. And this proposal that's in front of you basically provides a mechanism for the funding source, which was already identified in Public Law 30-201, to become payment on the debt service.
And the funding source would be the Territorial Highway Fund.
Sorry, one more time.
The funding source would be the Territorial Highway Fund?
Liquid fuels tax, I
Yes.
believe, yes.
And so utilizing the name of the foundation really is just a cosmetic ruse?
No, there would be an actual loan from USDA to the foundation that would be backed by a leaseback arrangement between the foundation and the University of Guam. The University of Guam would pay rent using the funding source, using the liquid fuels tax appropriation, annually appropriated, and then the foundation would take that rent and pay the debt service to USDA. And I note that that was discussed and developed together with the USDA group here and also with GITA.
And so the foundation itself really isn't going to be putting up any money?
They will not put up any money, that's correct. They will be responsible for the loan.
The other thing that I was concerned about in the bill is, I'm just wondering, I know that we have numerous students here and numerous students that are probably watching and trying to figure out what's happening. I'm just wondering whether or not they realize that on the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, the leaseback arrangement, at least according to what I have in front of me, the lease agreement and leaseback agreement may provide that if sufficient funds are not appropriated or otherwise available for the payment of amounts due under the leaseback, the university will have the obligation to vacate the lease facility or facilities, and the lender or its trustee, as applicable, shall have the right to use and occupancy of the lease facilities or facilities for the remainder of the term of the lease and the leaseback agreements, unless new mutually satisfactory terms are entered into. Do the students have their eyes wide open and the faculty understand that in the event that the Territorial Highway Fund isn't able to come up with $1 million, $1.5 million to pay for it, and the endowment, which is supposedly the one that's taking out the loan on behalf of the university, is not able to raise the funds to pay the annual debt service, that the student center would be vacated, and so would the engineering bill, you would have to vacate those buildings?
The language that you just read is fairly standard for this type of an agreement. As you recall, towards the end of that language, it said that, you know, unless other means could be developed to repay the loan, we would certainly look towards other means for repayment if we did not receive the annual appropriation. But you're absolutely right in the sense that without an annual appropriation from the legislature, I'm not sure that this building could go ahead.
And that's what I'm trying to make everybody understand, is that we're pushing this through, and I just want everybody to understand that if the money doesn't come through, they'd have a beautiful building on campus which could be turned into a massage parlor in the middle of the campus.
Yeah, I think that would be the last option, but you know, I'm sure we would try to find other ways and other means to make good on that
I
debt.
understand that, David, but I'm just saying is that I've been watching the foundation for the last 10 years, and the chairman knows what scrutiny I put the foundation through on almost an annual basis. And I have been watching how much it's been able to raise, in quotes, and how much it expends in its efforts to raise money, and what their success rate has been, and how much they're spending on administration and extravaganzas. And I just don't see that this is a viable. I mean, you know, it's like my saying, all right, you know, my nephew, I love my nephew, have him go out and borrow money to build a $1 million home, and but I'll be the one that's going to be paying for it.
You know, Senator, your concerns are on target, and I think they're fully understood by the university and certainly the University Foundation. I think that the effort that we're putting forth together for the capital campaign seeks to free the university of this kind of effort of constantly going back and forth between ourselves as a university, the foundation, and the government of Guam in this kind of push and pull on how to fund buildings. So the capital campaign effort that we're involved in now is entirely devoted. None of the capital campaign funds that we're raising goes to the management or the administration or the operations of the foundation. This is a commitment that the University Board of Regents takes seriously, and the Endowment Foundation. The language that you've read, of course, is absolutely true. I mean, that's the kind of the worst case scenario, and I'm sure that at that point in time, if that ever came to pass, we would find a way to deal with it, and I'm sure that we would find a way to deal with it in collaboration with the legislature at that time. But I fully appreciate the words of caution, and I think we're in a slightly different situation that we've been in the past with the foundation, particularly with this capital campaign and the kind of effort we're putting forward.
David, have you looked at the viability of the liquid fuel tax and how much money it's raised over the last couple of years, what it's currently committed to paying for throughout the government? I mean, it is the highway fund after all, and it is just providential that the university is a recipient of some of that money. And the proposal here is to take even more money. Maybe I'll ask this question this way. What is the current repayment on the Leon Guerrero building under the current USDA loan?
$500,000 from the legislature, but that's the total payment is $750,000.
And that's being paid for through the liquid fuel tax?
$500,000 is from the liquid fuels tax, $200,000 is from the foundation, and the remainder is from the university.
And the proposal here is to take the $12 million that we're currently paying $750,000 on, roll it over, refinance it. How many years has that been going now? 10?
I believe we have about 31, 32 left in terms of the refinancing. So, yes, that's correct. So we wouldn't put it back out to 40. We would just for the remainder of the term of the loan.
And when you combine the 12 for that, the 18 for the student center, the 4 for the engineering complex, and everything else, what do you figure is going to be the annual repayment, the debt service on that?
The total should be from the liquid fuels tax, $1.5 million. Total for all of those. That $500,000 is already committed in a previous public law. I think we're well aware of that. And the $1 million has already been authorized under PL 30-201. What we are seeking to do is to change the mechanism for realizing that $1 million.
And the way that this bill is written is that somehow this refinancing is going to, the savings, and I think that's actually used here. The savings on the refinancing is going to pay for the lease back, but
partially paid, that's right.
But the 500 is going to be part of the 1.5.
That's correct.
How much will the university and the endowment be putting up of that 1.5, or is there some additional amount on top of that like we're currently doing?
250.
So it'll be 1.75.
Correct.
How much does the endowment have currently in its bank account?
We currently have about 6 million, sir.
In cash?
No, well, they're invested. We basically have some of these gifts are restricted gifts given by our donors, and so we have restricted gifts that have been invested for the sole purposes of supporting the university.
And how much would be available in the event that cash was necessary to make annual repayments? From these investments, how much do you get annually in interest payments or return on investments?
On a good year, we're looking at possibly about 300,000. Sorry. Oh yeah. On a good year, between 400 to 500,000, depending on the market.
I'll allow somebody else to ask. I'll come back.
Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to all of you for being here and spending some time with us. I appreciate this because there has been great conversation about what this really means and how we can make good decisions. I don't think there's anyone that does not support the growth of the University of Guam, and I certainly appreciate the work that has gone into figuring out how we can actually realize the Student Center and the Engineering Annex. And so in following the questioning that our Vice Speaker has rendered, Mr. President, I would think that as you crafted this amendment, you have studied, researched, and proffered this language in actually looking at your data streams, your funding sources, the history of what has been collected and what you are able to pay out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So this was actually very much studied.
Yes, it was, and we had, you see, we were, hoping from the original public law that was passed in December 2010. The original thought was that somehow we were going to fit under the debt ceiling, and that we would wait until an appropriate time, and then the USDA loan would be available. But now we're in a time crunch, so the USDA loan won't be available for another couple of months at the most, and we've submitted our loan apps and all the process. So we're a little bit under the gun, but this is an opportunity, and it's really just bringing forward what had already previously been agreed to in public law.
Right. So as you studied your master plan, realized a vision that our students believed in and wanted, and then came Series A and Series B, and that changed the landscape, and that changed what we really were able to do, because we had other laws that were put into place, and we wanted to pay our people their taxes, and so we did all of that, and that changed what you were able to do. So then you moved forward and were able to, came up and you thought of the University of Guam Endowment Foundation, and that was a viable way of doing it. And we have $6 million in the bank there, and in addition to our local monies, you're believing and you're recommending that this is a way to move forward. It's any good thing, perhaps there is some risk, but you've studied it and you believe that this will work. And of course, you wouldn't put the University of Guam in any kind of jeopardy.
No, certainly not, and it's certainly not our intent to, although the language that is offered there is fairly common, it's certainly not our intent to see that language come to fruition, and we'd have other ways of dealing with it should that condition ever arise.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
you.
President. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Tom Ada, you're recognized on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I was reviewing Public Law 30-201, and then taking a look at the proposed amendment, I was trying to follow to see what has changed. And it appears that under Public Law 30-201, the $1 million that the university was looking at was in the form of a pledge. Now, if I understand, I'm not a financial expert, but if I understand it correctly, a financial pledge basically means if things go wrong, there's going to be that funding source that's going to be able to meet the necessary debt service. And at that time, we'll cross the bridge as to what current earmarks would be eliminated in order to be able to service the debt. So is that a correct interpretation, Dave? About the pledge versus the actual appropriation.
That's correct, Senator.
Right, so this is how this has evolved, correct? It went from a pledge to an outright appropriation.
The appropriation, my understanding is it would still remain a pledge and authority at this point in time, and that during each budget law there would be an annual appropriation. That's the part of the mechanism that keeps this outside of the debt ceiling.
Well, here's, if we take a look at Public Law 30-201,
Right.
well, I don't know if, I'm looking at the law itself, and it says here that $1,300,000, that includes the GCC projects, shall be secured by a pledge of liquid fuel tax revenues. And in the proposed amendment, it actually basically says that in addition to the $500,000 that was in the language to be appropriated annually, that now instead of a pledge, it will be a amount of $1 million per fiscal year are appropriated. So there's quite a distinct difference, isn't there, in that evolution?
Do you have the page number or the reference that I can take a look at?
Gosh, I don't know. See, I don't know if we got the same documents. I know that in Section 3 of Public Law 30-201.
Right, we have that. We have
Okay.
3201.
On page 5, line 23,
Right.
it says $1,300,000 per year shall be secured by a pledge
That's right.
of the liquid fuel tax. And then on this proposed amendment that's to be added on as a rider to Bill 437, you'll see on page 5, line 7, where it says that the amount of at least $1 million per fiscal year are appropriated to the University of Guam. So I just want to make sure that I'm correct in my interpretation that this is the evolution that has taken place.
Just give me a second, if you would. I'm there.
And he goes on.
I believe that the language says available revenues in the amount of at least $1 million are appropriated. So what they're talking about is, it does not say pledge. You're correct in that. But my understanding is that what they're talking about here is the structure of the leaseback arrangement, which basically will depend on this payment of the two structures.
That's
will
right.
depend on
So the way
1.2.
it's structured now, it really takes the foundation, it takes the university off the hook, or the foundation off the hook from having to go raise the annual lease payments, essentially, because then now it's guaranteed that the annual lease payments will come from the highway fund. But be that as it may, whether it's a pledge, which means we deal with it later, we'll cross that bridge if we have to, or an actual outright appropriation. The concern that I have is that I was looking at the data available from the Guam Highway Fund. And if you take out all the earmarks right now, there's about $127,000 that's a balance in that account. That's including the University of Guam CIP fund that was passed under public law. So I guess my concern here is, does anybody have any suggestions as to which earmarks we want to eliminate? We can take out the public street lights. We can eliminate the funding for the power for the mayor's council, for Parks and Rec, or we can basically take out the subsidy for the mass transit. Does anybody have any suggestions, or is that to be left to the policymakers?
Well, Senator, out of profoundest respect for you, I didn't run for the legislature. I'm president of the University of Guam. And I don't mean to come back at you in that way. The difference between the pledge and the annual appropriation, you know, maybe it looks like now we're a little bit more tightly wound. But, you know, just based on the language that was pointed to by Senator Cruz earlier, you know, we understand even the vagaries of that process, that at some point along the line, even if this were to pass into public law, that it could be that a future legislature or will, in a sense, go back on this. So we fully understand that and comprehend that. So even though the evolution of the term pledge has moved over into appropriation, as you know, the appropriation is an annual process. And so, you know, we still could be having more and more what I would consider friendly discussions on this matter in the future.
Okay. Well, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that if, given the new language now, we would actually have to identify earmarks that need to be made, that need to be actually eliminated in order to free up $1 million for the purposes of this leaseback agreement. For the representative from the Guam Community College, I noticed that there's language in here which is asking to appropriate $300,000 annually. Is that the estimated debt service on the $6 million of projects, the
Yes,
two
Senator.
projects?
Yes, Senator.
Okay.
That is.
And in the language, in the section for the Guam Community College, it's asking for a pledge from the highway fund. So why is it that GCC is only looking for a pledge versus an outright? Well, I mean, no, I guess the outright annual appropriation is at $300,000. That's your annual debt service on the $6 million, correct?
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
And then you're just asking that in the event things go south, then you're asking that the revenue, the tax highway revenue fund basically be the backup.
Yes, that's correct, based on the original public law.
Okay. Dave, I noticed that I guess the university is looking at refinancing the current loan that it has with on the School of Business building, and I guess the savings from that, was that going to go roll over to pay for the roof replacement on the arts, or is it going to go to supplement the annual lease amount?
Supplement the annual payment for the Student Services Center and Engineering Annex, Senator.
Okay, because the project to replace the roof on the arts building seems to be a new item on this here.
That was part of the original language when they provided for the original capital improvement fund for the Leon Guerrero building. That also included, if there were funds available, that we would do something about the fine arts roof. That never took place. Since that time, we've made pretty substantial repairs to the fine arts roof, so we don't feel that that's at risk anymore.
Okay. Did your legal counsel review this proposed amendment?
She did, as well as the bond counsel from ORIC, as I believe they were the two legal people that reviewed, yes.
Okay. And I ask that only because as I was comparing the proposed amendment to the Public Law 30-201, it wasn't quite clear whether we went through the motion of repealing certain sections here. And for example, in Public Law 30-201, I believe the language there was that funds will go into the University of Guam capital improvement account. And it would be then up to the university to divvy out what it needs and to GCC. But then in the proposed amendment, we're looking at creating the UOG and the GCC Capital Improvements Fund, but I didn't see language that, you know, said, okay, well, never mind, forget that last language, and here it is. So, I don't know, maybe in the process of reading I got myself confused, but it seemed, that seemed to be the case.
That's right. We felt it was better and more efficient and effective to separate the two into the UOG CIF into the GCC CIF. Originally it was combined to be a prorated allocation. Since that time we've had a number of meetings. UOG is going to take $1 million and GCC 300,000.
And I have no problem with that. What I'm concerned about is that we're creating now the GCC Capital Improvement Fund, but I don't think there was language in there that basically repeal that combined Capital Improvement Fund account.
Yeah, you may be correct, Senator. I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, members of the panel. I just have basically a couple questions, maybe to contextualize, dovetailing off of the comments of the previous speaker. This was vetted by GITA, from what I understand, Mr. President? Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and so my understanding is the term that follows on the available revenues, if we take this on from the top of the statement, the leaseback agreement may be structured as an annually renewable lease with provision for automatic renewals to the extent the liquid fuel tax revenues from the highway fund or other available revenues in the amount of lease. Now, if I understood this right in discussions with GITA, this was to ensure that we would not be commingled with the debt ceiling. This removes you from that.
That's correct.
Okay, so that therein may lie the protection of not necessarily de-appropriating, but taking from the general fund or whatever revenue source, ensuring to make sure that you can meet your debt obligations.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. President, just one other question, and this is kind of, might be a little off the wall, but in your experience in Congress and also understanding the structure of land grant institutions, is there instances, particularly where you have loan guarantees under USDA, that debt forgiveness would be in the realm of possibility in instances such that university couldn't cover it, a special provision under land grant institutions?
Well, hope springs eternal. I would find it very unusual. This is, we're trying to get a direct loan. And so the availability of this funding is, you know, under the, from the USDA side is about a little over $900 million is available in direct funding for direct loans. Under any possible scenario, this door will certainly close in August and September, and will never be reopened again because the and regardless of who becomes president next year, because it'll just be a whole different time. We have all the kinds of cuts that are coming up. So this is the kind of urgency on this. It is possible that there may be debt forgiveness in the future. You know, there is, there are always opportunities to introduce legislation or make arrangements to link different kinds of obligations that the federal government may have to the government of Guam, and then forgiving the government of Guam whatever debts it may have in turn. And you know, this was cleverly done by the U.S. Virgin Islands about 4 or 5 years ago on some debts. So you know, that possibility always exists. But that's you know, that's beyond the. Although it could, those kinds of ideas could originate in this body, it would have to take place over in that other body.
Yeah, and I say that, Mr. President, simply because of the fact that when I was at Land Management, and which is ongoing, I believe they're even approaching this approach now in terms of their new building. They're looking at a couple different finance options. But there was also that shovel-ready project listing, and then there was also the possibility of a certain percentage of that loan becoming a grant. So I just say that so that maybe there is some understanding that while there is risk, and there will be risk going forward, there are some special considerations for land-grant institutions given the fact that they are establishments of the government per se that maybe private universities don't have the option of. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and Mr. President.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. Is there anyone else who would like to comment? Or Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess the question actually is twofold. One's for the Executive Director of the Foundation, University of Guam. With regards to what is the Foundation's total obligation annually?
Currently, the Endowment Foundation is a separate entity. We're a nonprofit organization solely to support the University of Guam. The Endowment Foundation stood behind the first USDA loan for the Jesus and Yueña Leon Grow building. So on an annual basis, we commit about $200,000 to repayment of that debt service for that loan. In addition to that, also some of the scholarships that we provide to our students at the university. So you're looking roughly about close to $250,000, $300,000 on an annual basis of support directly to the university.
Okay, and you said that on a good year.
On a good year with the market, yeah, you're looking about $400,000.
So
$400,000.
So with $400,000 on a good year, you already got $250,000 in obligation. That leaves you with $150,000.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, like I mentioned, we're a separate entity from the University of Guam. So we have a staff that has put together the, since we've come on board, most of us are new to the endowment, basically about 2 years. We've tried to get the Endowment Foundation to where it needs to be in terms of raising funds for the 60th anniversary of the Capitol Facilities Project. So a portion of that goes to the operations of the Endowment Foundation.
Okay. What is your pledge for this arrangement?
For this arrangement, we will still maintain the $200,000 commitment to the endowment, towards the repayment of the first USDA loan. Our commitment right now is we're undergoing the $30 million fundraising capital campaign for the new facilities, the Student Services Center and the engineering annex. And once we're able to leverage those proceeds, then we should be able to fund some of these debt services for these facilities.
Okay, I asked this question because I'm still trying to figure the arrangement that you have with, you apparently are going to be the, are you going to be the applicant to this loan for the USDA?
Yeah, The intent is for the endowment foundation to be the vehicle to apply for the loan. I believe there was a previous public law that was passed that basically used the same source of income or source of revenue, which is the liquid fuels tax, to pay for the debt service. I believe that was the previous legislation. And so this is just the endowment's foundation way of supporting this application to support, to get the facilities going at the Student Services Center.
Okay. Now I'm going to turn to GCC with regards to your foundation. Who's going to be the applicant for the loan?
The GCC Foundation will be the applicant.
And what is their pledge? How much do, with regards to this loan? Oh, first off, what are your current obligations?
There's only about $1.5 million that's currently restricted under the foundation's assets.
So what are your annual obligations now?
Just the current annual operating budget for the foundation and the fundraising activities that they do through the college.
Of the $300,000, how much does the foundation, how much is the foundation responsible for raising annually?
The foundation raises approximately, some of it's pledged based on certain buildings.
No, okay, I'm talking about this particular provision. I mean,
Yes.
what you're asking for here.
Yes.
Of the $300,000, or how much do you, well, how much does Guam Community College want to apply for in as far as the loan?
It's $6 million. $6 million.
And so how much do you anticipate the annual payment to be?
A little bit under 300,000. It's based on, depending on what the percentage interest rate is at that time. Current USD interest rate at 3.5 over 40 years is about
So
a little
how
bit less
much is the foundation now in itself pledging to be able to pay off the $300,000?
The foundation is willing to take the entire loan for the $6 million, but again, the repayment will be through the liquid fuel tax, through the lease back with the college.
How much are you getting from liquid fuel tax now?
We do not receive any money from the fuel tax.
You don't receive any monies. Madam Chair, I think that, and you know, I appreciate that. I think that a member of the fiscal team, somebody that can talk to us about how much is in the liquid, I mean, how much they anticipate to be receiving from the liquid fuel tax. I don't think it'll be right for the University of Guam or the Guam Community College to be able to talk about, you know, what we anticipate the revenues are going to be in, you know, in that source, nor the conversation as to, you know, where we can pare down and where we can move monies around from other, or where we can get from other sources to be able to accomplish. And, you know, right now we're looking at almost, how much? 1.8 million. How much already? Right now have we, just the University of Guam? 500,000. So we're looking at 1.3. I don't think it's right for the University of Guam or the Guam Community College, the members of the panels that are up there, to be able to have a discussion as to where we're going to find $1.3 million in a fund that only has about $150,000 left. So I'm asking that, you know, we call somebody from I don't know, BBMR, Revenue and Tax, who can bring us those figures.
The sponsor of the bill, you want to recess then to call in BBMR and or DOA?
Well, I don't know, Madam Speaker, if that's entirely necessary, because the administration is the one who put this financing scheme together with the University of Guam and GCC. I mean, in the previous bill, or in the main bill that we talked about, that was also a question that needed to be resolved. But in this case, we passed an earlier law and told the University of Guam and GCC that they can go forward with these projects, and then through unforeseen circumstances, we were also pressured to pay tax refunds, which has always been a top priority of this legislature. So in order to do that, we had to bring the debt ceiling all the way up to 100%, which prevented these two institutions of higher education from moving forward. So the mechanics are the same. The repayment abilities are the same in the previous law that you sponsored. What we're trying to focus on this bill is to whether or not give them the authority to have their foundations make these loans to USD. And so that's where I think the focus should be, is whether or not the foundations by law should be authorized to go and get these USDA loans, not necessarily the pledge of the liquid fuel tax. And so I'm going to rise in an objection to that request to recess to bring BBMR in only on the basis that we've already decided that when we pass the current public law before us, and through, I guess, unforeseen circumstances, again, Madam Speaker, they're prevented from doing what we told them and what you told them they can do, and now they come back with a very creative way that would allow them to move forward.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate that, and if I'm looking at the amendment itself, and it says, Guam Highway Fund or other available revenues in the amount, and so on and so forth. Again, I don't think that it is, that the University of Guam or the Guam Community College, okay, yes, they're here to ask for the authorization and they ask to move forward, recognizing when the original law came into play, that was before, of course, the whole issue with regards to the bonds. Things have changed, and if we're looking at this as a revenue source, the Guam Highway Fund, and recognizing there's less than $150,000, it is not up to the people that are sitting up at the panel there to be able to have the conversation as to where else we can look at. I'm trying to find ways, ma'am, to be able so that both the University of Guam and the Guam Community College, after the conversations and after they hear that, okay, according to the administration, here's where those other funding sources are at, here's where you're going to come up with the $1.8 million that is necessary for both institutions, they can move forward. So that is why I'm asking for members of the fiscal team of the administration to be to be on a panel, so that we can ask the question of where this money is going to be coming from. Just looking at the source, ma'am, and there's no money.
So there was a request and there was an objection, so I'm going to call for the vote. So on calling in BBMR and DOA. Yes, on the motion, Senator Tamara.
Can we have a recess before you call for the? You want to discuss? Oh, okay, he wants to discuss a little bit more.
Senator Tamara, you have the floor.
I think the problem, for me, the difficulty is, it was really just last Friday that, we got this document here, and it's rather all of a sudden that we're going to have to sort through this and figure out what do we throw out so that we can free up an additional $1.3 million. Maybe pose a question either to Mr. O'Brien or President Underwood. Would it be possible to meet, to change the language here so that the language is that it authorizes using the Guam Highway Fund as a pledge. And maybe for the first year, the two institutions are going to have to come up with your own payment for at least that first payment, because then hopefully that will give us a little bit more time to sort out where this additional $1.3 million is going to come from. But I understand that you're up against some time constraint, and we got to move forward with this. So if you're able to live and put your neck in the noose and live with a pledge as opposed to an outright appropriation, then maybe we can move forward with this thing, and we really won't, at least for today, we won't need to bring in BBMR.
On the motion, Senator Munya Barnes and then the Vice Speaker.
I'm just concerned that if you amend the word pledge, to say pledge and not authorize, I think we may be up against bond council. I think we've had this conversation before. I'm just saying that that's just based on my recollection that there may be some problem with that. And I guess based on the reason why the foundation is being utilized is so that we don't hit the debt ceiling that we're very close to there. Am I right?
My understanding from hearing them is that not only has GIDA been involved in the crafting of this legislation, but bond counsel was also consulted. And in order to not then allow the government or have the government be forced to going above the 100% debt
That's
ceiling,
right.
is to bring in the foundation as the entity
As a facilitator.
to take the loan.
Yeah, right, as the facilitator. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we knew what we were working with. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Vice Speaker.
I know when I asked the question of the representative of the administration last week that some did not accept their answer. But if my recollection was correct, Mr. Titano said, if GDOE feels that these projects are of a high enough priority, then we, the administration, would help them find within their budget the amount to be able to pay back the lease agreement. Is the university and GCC ready, in the event that there isn't sufficient funds in the highway fund, to find an additional 1.3, 1.8, 300,000 from your current budget to make the annual debt service?
Well, of course not. I mean, it's a simple answer. We just don't have that kind of resources. And so, you know, in making the comparison as to what the administration can do with the overall government of Guam budget and what the University of Guam can do with the, you know, $32 million a year that it gets from the government of Guam. It's just, it's not a fair comparison. We're under the gun, so you know the opportunity for the USDA loan is here. If we don't take advantage of it, that door will close. Then we won't get. And then the other problem is, of course, is that the word pledge then kind of moves it over into the complications of debt ceiling. So that's why this word appropriation was used. So in order to avoid that issue and avoid that problem, we have come up with a process whereby we use the foundation. You know, it's not, I understand that it's a very difficult call, and I understand all the issues that have been raised. So I'm not oblivious to that, and I'm not unmindful of them. We're just appealing at this particular point in time to do this. We thought that we'd have to do this as kind of standalone legislation. The opportunity as this other vehicle was moving, and it seemed pretty germane to it because it did mention UOG and GCC facilities in it, and there was this kind of previous commitment. So we thought we'd kind of activate it within that time frame, you know, fully recognizing that at the end of the day, if the legislature passes this and at some point in time in the future decides not to appropriate the money, fully recognizing that the university is going to have to eat it in some fashion, fully recognizing that the burden is going to fall on us. But, you know, I think that's pretty clear. I think you pointed that out, Senator Cruz. So we accept that. We understand that. We think it's, of course, we think, you know, and we're not unmindful of all the other needs that the island has. but we think it's a fair request to make at the 60th anniversary of the university. We also think that as we fully explain, what our other capital needs are. Our other capital needs are a fine arts auditorium, are a Triton Engagement Center, are a 21st century campus. All of that we anticipate will not be funded by the public in any way. We fully anticipate leveraging that through our independent fundraising which we're engaged in. But in order to make that viable, you know, the Student Services Center and the School of Engineering needs your help.
Senator Mabini, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you again for everybody here being in the panel to help answer the questions regarding this particular amendment. I think the President may have answered the question that I was about to raise, but which raises a critical concern. If in fact our current budget situation would not be able to cover, or excuse me, we would not be able to cover any of this debt responsibility, and it would fall under the hands of the university and the college to take that on. And since we have representatives from our student representatives, are our students ready to take on that responsibility? Because of course it comes down to tuition increases, which we know is a burden in itself. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Senator Mabini. And that's an interesting question. I mean, whether we look at this picture, I mean, I get the points that we're bringing forward, whether we have enough funds and whether there's allocation in the question of the bill. But we look at it, and if we all had that outlook, it'd be like me asking whether I'd be graduating next semester or next spring. If I said I wasn't, we'd be doing the same situation here. But there's an opportunity, and I'm very appreciative of seeing that there's that chance, and I know that the senators are looking at that opportunity. If the students are here today hoping to get something positive out of this, it was almost a hopeless situation until we found an opportunity to use the endowment to get this project moving. I almost thought that it wouldn't happen, not in my lifetime, maybe not in my kids' lifetime, but with their creative thinking, we have that chance. The students have always faced tuition increase. In fact, if we don't get the appropriation for our regular operation, we may face it again. But that's why the magic of the student spirit is there. We're willing to see what it takes because we understand that it's a critical need. Our island needs to prepare the younger generation to handle the infrastructure in the future. If we don't get the engineering annex, we would be without that need. We would be in a greater need for the island. And the Student Services Center, between 3,500 to 4,000 students today, but we're looking at increase in enrollment. Our current building is one of the oldest on campus. Whether we can handle it or not, we can't. In fact, the air conditioners are starting to break down. The students are no longer staying on campus. It should not be that we're going to go to class and then go home, because we should have just gone off island and found a better chance with people in the States who would look out for their students. I know that our people put great senators in positions who will look at that opportunity, find what it's going to take, because our trust is still with you. And we're hoping that you hear the message. I see which senators are understanding the point that we're getting across. And maybe we still need to talk to the others about this. Tony, I'm going to offer it to Student Regent.
Sure. If I understand your question, it's whether or not the students are ready to bear the cost, because worst case scenario is going to be tuition increase. I believe, and this is just with our conversation with the students, is that if they see an improvement in not only their learning environment, but the education they receive here on island, then the cost to funding this, whether it be our tuition increase, wouldn't be such a burden to us. Because we're seeing improvements, and it's this vision. Of course, with any choice, any option, there will be opportunity costs. But the benefits of preparing today for tomorrow outweighs that risk. And the risk is still there. I mean, fortunately, we have great administrators who strategically look for ways to bring the university to how Dr. Underwood envisions the 21st century campus. So I hope the senators, as well as what my brother has mentioned before, take heed of that and acknowledge that. And we can all be a part of this great movement. We just have to realize it through maybe the beginning of our Student Services Center and our engineering annex. Thank you.
Senator Duenas.
Yeah, I mean, just for the purposes of this objection and moving forward on the conversation we're having, Dave, do you think that, you know, other fiduciaries within the government coming forward to provide additional information will bring anything new to the table with regard to this financing scheme and the like that we don't probably already know?
No, I think not. I think, you know, this was part of the prior discussion. Gita's been on board this whole time. Yeah, I mean, Senator Blas is correct. I certainly don't feel capable of discussing where the LFT is going. But, you know, I think it was one of our base assumptions that the pledge, the authorization, whatever, in PL 30-201 was there to support, and it was up to us if we wanted to realize these two buildings, the Student Services Center and the Engineering Annex. That was just a basic assumption from where we started, Senator.
Yeah, and I'm just going to make a comment, Madam Chair, that, I mean, to me, in our caucus discussions as well, and looking forward to this, is that really it's, when we're talking about the pledge, it's almost equivalent to the BPT, which has been the pledge on the other funding schemes that have been going forward, meaning, you know, that's, you're putting forward the loan guarantee, the full faith and trust of the government of Guam on the basis of you were authorized to do this, or it was your prior intention, regardless, prior to the issues that are facing us now. First of all, the debt ceiling was the fundamental issue. We were going to debate this either down the road or we're going to debate it now. And so the fact of the matter is that none of those terms and conditions have changed. So I'm just going to be in agreement that I don't think there's any additional information to be provided by. Thank you, Dave.
Senator Ada?
Mr. O'Brien, if you can maybe look at the proposed amendment, and on page 5, starting on line 4 down to line 9. Those lines talk about the leaseback agreement may be structured as an annual renewable lease, et cetera, in the amount of $1 million, and that this is the sentence that talks about the requirement for that annual appropriation. And I know that, Dr. Underwood, you indicated that you just don't have the resources to at least go it on your own for the first year. But if we struck out that language, then that buys us, I think that will buy us the time that is needed to then put the, I guess, the wisdom of Solomon as to what do we throw out and what do we leave in. But it'll give us that time that we need. Everything else that is needed, the language about the pledging and all that stuff, is already in the bill. The striking out of that sentence, though, on lines 4 through 9, basically says, we don't have the time to deal with it now, but we got to get moving. You're going to have to take that risk on, that you're going to at least be able to take on that first payment, and hopefully by then we would have found the necessary funds to appropriate.
Well, of course, you know, there's been a lot of advice given on this particular line, and you know, in working with the bond counsel on this matter as well. And we're simultaneously not only trying to stay out of the debt ceiling, we're also simultaneously trying to secure a USDA direct loan. And I think without that language, I think the second hurdle, certainly we won't be able to. It's hard to imagine that USDA would move forward with that loan without some kind of assurance like this. So, You know, it's like trying to reverse the ultimate responsibility is on UOG. You know, at the end of the day, I think we fully recognize that in some fashion. And that'll certainly be reflected in whatever loan document comes out of that. I'm sure, I'm positive that the SBPA building is structured that way. So, but now what you're proposing, Senator, is to move it to the front end as opposed to saying that it's the ultimate at the end of the day. And you know, we're not in a position to take care of that at this time. And I wish I had other things that I could say about that, but that's exactly where we stand.
Senator, you still have the floor. You're done. Senator Guthertz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to welcome our panel here today. You know, I know my colleagues have some questions they've brought forward. Of course, everyone is concerned about ensuring that we can repay this loan. But my instincts have always been one of us being a risk taker. And I'm kind of optimistic that things are going to get better in this community, and that the liquid fuel tax fund, the Territorial Highway Fund, will improve. My question is, in what year do you think the first payment of this loan would be expected? The repayment. In what year? In what month?
If we did it similarly to the SBPA loan, I would think it would be, we would make interest-only payments for about the construction period, so that'd be about 3 years. So that would be probably the 4th year of the loan, definitely before the 5th. So that in that period, Senator.
And my point, particularly to my colleagues, is we're not talking about next month or next year or the following year. We're talking about 3 years from now, when the actual payments for this initiative would begin. And I'm very optimistic that things at that point in our community economically will be a lot better, and that we would expect additional funding in the Territorial Highway Fund by that time, or if necessary, we could identify another source of revenue to take care of this through legislative action, if needed. So I would like to ask my colleagues to look at this from that perspective. At the same time, Madam Speaker, on page 7 and page 13, we need to fill in a blank here.
Point of inquiry.
Yes.
Point of inquiry. We're talking about interest only payment. What is then the payments interest only?
Could you rephrase your question,
Well,
Senator?
the good senator is saying that we don't have to worry about this for the next 3 years. Then what are we worrying about for the first 3 years? What's the amount that we're worried about?
What would be the interest? Let's say 4% on 21 million. I think it'd be close probably to 700,000 or so.
700,000 on top of what we're already paying, 500,000.
That's correct. Yes.
So 1.2 million.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, Madam Speaker, on page 7 and 13, we need to fill in the gap here on page 9 and indicate what would be the percentage, and that's line 9, I'm sorry, line 9 on page 7. If we recall our discussions earlier, and also in consultation with GIDA Administrator Carl Pangolin, and he recommended a ceiling of 8.5% max. Now, I'd like to ask David or the President if there's a problem with that percentage. Do you see any problem with that? Because we have to indicate it here if we pass this.
I think it's a maximum, as you said,
Yes.
Senator, so yeah, I don't have any particular problem. I think,
Okay.
you know, for the university to think it could do this loan at 8.5% would be impractical at best, so yeah.
Okay, so because we have to insert something here, we can't leave it blank. And we consulted with Mr. Pangolin.
I think it's his call, that's correct.
All right, so if I may, Madam Speaker, I'd like to suggest that we fill in the blank on page 7 and also on page 13. On page 13, it's on line 7. On page 7, it's on line 9. And indicate does not exceed 8.5% per annum.
So on the amendment for page 7, line 9, is to add does 8.5% after it says does not exceed 8.5%.
Yes.
And on page 13, line 7, the same would be 8.5%.
That's correct, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment. No objections to the amendment? So ordered. Senator Ada.
I guess maybe I'd like to follow on to the comments made by the preceding speaker regarding the optimism that things will get better. The sun will shine tomorrow. And I'm wondering if that optimism can be supported by possibly a motion from that preceding speaker, that then this initial appropriation will not be made until, I think you estimated the first payment's not going to be due, what, maybe 3 years from now?
No, the first full payment, that's right, principal plus interest. There will be interest-only payments based upon the drawdowns we do from USDA.
I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the time that we need to figure out where to, you know, how we're going to fund, if we're going to take it from the highway fund and take some of it from the public streetlights account, how are we going to make up for that? You know, which shell game are we going to play? So, I mean, the only way that that's going to happen, because the way the language is written right now is when this thing is passed, is that we're going to have to appropriate $1 million, 1.3 million, $1 million for the university and 300,000 for GCC. And I recognize the fact that nobody wants to make any amendments to the bill because of the extensive discussions that's been had with bond counsel and everybody else. And so, you know, what I heard earlier was that don't make any changes to the bill. So my understanding is that, I mean, unless there's a language in here that says, yes, we will appropriate that $1.3 million, but not until the first appropriation will become effective, you know, a certain date down the road, then that just gives us that time to sort this thing out. Otherwise, we're going to be, I mean, just, man, be a real guessing game right now.
Senator Ada, in response to your question regarding the line on appropriation or appropriated, I believe that language was in there to define what the payments from the leaseback could possibly be from, but it's still going to be an annual appropriation from you good senators annually. So it's not to say that this is appropriating the 1 million right now, but it's the appropriation we will be asking for the appropriation on an annual basis in our budgets.
Senator, we were just discussing whether interest-only payments, some kind of language that would reflect interest-only payments for 3 years would be sufficient. I would think so. You know, the loan, the structure of the loan is, if it's typical with what we did before, we paid as we drew down. So, for example, as the construction proceeds, we draw down from USDA, pay the contractor, et cetera. And then during that period, USDA would charge us for what was drawn down. I would absolutely be, certain that we would go through a similar process and that USDA would treat us much as they did before, since this is a similar loan program, direct loan, rural development, community facility, that would be acceptable if that addresses a bit of your concerns.
Well, certainly it seems that that kind of scenario. I mean, finding $700,000 is a little bit easier than finding $1 million. Finding $500,000 is going to be even easier. So that's what I'm driving at, and if again, it's how do we buy time so we can sit down and sort this thing out. I mean, I'm sure if we zeroed out the mayor's, the account, the $750,000 for the power bill, to pay the power bills for the mayors, I mean, I'm sure they'll be marching down here in force. So we need to figure out where are we going to get this thing. And believe me, I want to see this thing happen, but it ain't going to happen with just a lot of
okay, Senator Gutherts, and I think right after this we'll take a recess. Senator Gutherts?
I'd just like to remind everybody that years ago, when the School of Business and Public Ad was being considered, the same approach was used, correct, Mr. O'Brien? And the senators at that time, I think they had similar questions, but they were risk takers, and they had faith that when due, we would be able to find a way to ensure that this would be paid for, the school would be paid for. And this government has kept that commitment to the university. I'm sure there are some legitimate concerns, but at the same time, we have an opportunity here to do something that's really critical for the university, and we all know that. That School of Engineering is very important. That Student Center facility is very important. It's important for a lot of reasons. This would also allow the university to identify additional funding sources through donors who see that a structure is going to be built. The university can market this to its potential donors through the foundation or directly. And when they know a structure is going to be built, they will want to come in and help. That's what happened with the School of Business. The donations didn't really come too much in advance of the construction. But when the donors started seeing what was happening, they wanted to put their name on the building. They wanted a name in each classroom. They wanted to be recognized because they knew it was a reality and it was happening. So I'd like to see us do this for the university and also for GCC that's done a tremendous job in their capital facilities. It's amazing what's happened at GCC. And the same thing is true at the university. Personally, I don't want to see them get stuck in a rut where they can't move forward because of an impediment of some kind. Now, we found the money to do different things in this legislature when we had a hard time finding that money. We found a way to do it. And sometimes we're very creative about it. And Senator Ada himself knows that the school facility bill that we're considering today provided a vehicle to address other related needs, such as school buses and things like that. It's a matter of creativity. It's a matter of risk-taking. It's a matter of having faith that this community will see an improvement in the economy in the next 3 years, so we'd be able to keep this commitment. And if at that time we need to identify a replacement source to meet this obligation, we can make that adjustment by law. So I say we go forward. The university has consulted with Gita. I'm sure the president has consulted with the governor and his representatives. And this is the last link in this chain at this point. Thank you very much.
We're going to take a brief recess.